All right, welcome, welcome. I just had to restart my live. Just having some little tech things I'm working out. So thank you guys for coming in. Those of you watching the replay, go ahead and type replay in the comments. Today's topic is a little bit about sneaky diet culture. I felt this was oh, you know what? Huh, I don't have my headphones in. You probably can't hear me. All right, that should be better. Hopefully you guys can hear me now. I was going to give the whole presentation without a speaker, which would have been fantastic, right? It would have been lovely. So if you're here, go ahead and say hello in the comments. Hopefully I'll be able to see the comments come through. Sometimes I have a hard time when I'm recording on my computer. So if I don't answer your questions right away, it's not for a lack of interest in answering those questions, but it's more of just a technology thing. Facebook is always changing how things work. So in either case, again, if you're watching the replay, go ahead and put replay in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. So I'm just going to see if anything comes through here. I'm on my phone too to see maybe if I can pull up the comments that way, but it doesn't look like I'm able to. So that's no problem. We're going to be talking about sneaky diet culture today. And I am really interested in this topic. I've been interested in this topic for a long time, and I feel like it could be so helpful for every woman, really. I mean, I obviously gear this group towards mindful and intuitive eating practices. And in order to embrace mindful and intuitive eating, I think it's really helpful in many circumstances to understand why we have the diet culture that we have and how it's been generational. It's not just like it's this group of women living right now that experiences struggle within diet culture. It's actually something that women have been dealing with for generations, stretching way back hundreds of years. So I want to talk about that today because it's so enlightening and it's so helpful to recognize that there's a huge history to diet culture. And it has led to a place where we're at now where we can look back at history and be like, wow, that's not the truth, right? That's not the truth. And we can look and do things a different way. And so in addition to the history, I'm also going to talk about how, because this history has been ingrained through generation to generation, that this can be a source of liberation because we can now start to see how diet culture still sneaks into our lives. Like there's these really sneaky ways that we experience diet culture that you might not even recognize. I know I didn't, and I'm still coming up against it, right? We are born into a particular time in history, and we're taught from the people that we live with, our family members, moms, dads, peers, about what we should think about our body, about food, and they just become part of us, right? It becomes pervasive. And so the only way to break free is to recognize it and see it and decide if that's the truth that we truly want to cultivate or if there's a new way. And as you know, if you've been watching or been in this group for a while, you understand that I am huge on this idea of reprogramming our relationship with food and body. And part of that starts with awareness, and awareness of the history, awareness of how diet culture can sneak into our day-to-day life so that we can feel empowered and have the opportunity to do better, right? Oh, hey, good. There's a comment that came through from Sheila. Hey, beautiful. Wonderful. So maybe my comments are working now. They haven't in every Facebook Live. So, okay. So let's see. Uh-oh. Uh-oh, I don't want to, I found it on my phone too. I don't want to play that. Okay. So, and then I'm going to talk about a little bit about gut health and how it's actually tied to our mental, emotional beliefs around food. It's fascinating research. So I hope you're able to stick around or at least come back and watch the recording about that, because there is so much I want to say about that. And I talk about it in my course and my group coaching program, Peace with Food and Soul, in more detail, but I at least want to give you a preview into what that all means. And then close it up today with talking about what we can do, how we can combat this, how we can look at our own lives, our relationship with food and body, shift and change that, and also influence the next generation, right? Because we can break the cycle. It's been generational, but we can break the cycle. So I'm going to get into that. Okay, so let's start with the history. This is very brief. So I actually will reference, there's a woman who's written a book. It's an amazing book. She runs the page Race and Yoga. And I'm just pulling up her information. I want to make sure I say her name, the name of her book right. But a lot of the information I'm going to share with you is actually from her. Her name is Stephanie Evans, and she talks a lot about the historical background of diet culture rooted in racism, which I just think I can't wait to read her book. I recently learned about it. I've listened to her on some podcasts, and she talks a lot about diet culture being rooted in racism. And she's written a book. Gosh, where is it? Where is that book name? I was going to pull it up before the live, and it just Fearing the Black Body. Okay, that's what it's called. Fearing the Black Body, the Racial Origins of Fat Phobia. So if this is at all interesting to you, I encourage you to look that book up, Stephanie Evans, and it's called Fearing the Black Body, the Racial Origins of Fat Phobia. I'm sorry, and the author is Sabrina Strings. I apologize. I'm switching things around a little bit. But if you check out that on Amazon, you can learn a little bit more about what I'm about to share with you. So if you think about historically weight, you may have recognized that, you look back at pictures of from like the Renaissance period, and there's these paintings of these women who are very voluptuous, very curvy, right? And that was actually considered the ideal body shape. So it's interesting just to see that and recognize, oh, culture really influences what beauty is based on the era, based on the time. So, in many cases, I always remind women, having a voluptuous round body was in many cultures still, and historically in the past has been a sign of wealth, has been a sign of health. And it's interesting to see how that shifted into the 20th and 21st century, where we've started to idealize bodies that look thinner than that, right? So things always are we look at things through a different lens, right? Depending on the time period that we've lived in. And actually back, in the early 1900s and before, if you just look at America, a lot of healthcare providers were actually encouraging women to gain weight. There was this long time comparison of Americans to that Abe Lincoln body shape, noted for being really stringy and really slim. Okay, so for a long time, Americans were known as these like kind of stringy long people, and there was this desire to kind of fatten them up because it helped with fertility. And a woman has enough fat storage on her body, she's able to better care for a growing infant, right, in her womb, and deliver that infant from a healthy place. If she's too thin, doesn't have enough fat stores, pregnancy can be difficult. So for a long time, there was this push in America to actually add some weight to women, which I think is just fascinating, right? It makes sense. And it wasn't until the 1800s, and this is where I want to talk about the roots in racism, where there was this increase in fat phobia and dieting that was intentionally used as a tool. Okay, this is fascinating, in justifying slavery. So white authorities around this time claimed that larger Black bodies had to be the result of gluttony or being unchristian and therefore uncivilized. Okay, so there was this shift where white women were encouraged to diet, become thinner, to distinguish themselves from Black bodies. Now, again, the book that I mentioned is going to go more into this, but I just want to kind of set the stage for us here. And then if you move forward, so it kind of started around the 1800s, and then in the 1920s-ish, there was another agenda to normalize white women's weight. So there was this push with physicians and media messaging at the time that was really directed at white women to the exclusion of the Black woman. And if you look at history, and I am not a history buff on this at all, again, this is where I want to reference you back to that book, but there was actually these historical attempts throughout history to sterilize Black women to reduce the Black population, which is just, it's terrifying to even think that was a thing. It just like kind of makes my heart like, what? This wasn't that long ago in history. And so there has been these roots from the early 1900s to actually really promotion towards white women to look a certain way, okay? And all of the diet messages were aimed at white women. And so I have to say, like there were pictures and images of, and it's been referenced, there's pictures of this, this woman standing on a scale,
Okay, this is horrifying, if you ask me, but a woman standing on the scale, and next to her is her daughter looking at the scale as well, and promoting daily weight checks to ensure that you keep your weight at a certain place to be quote unquote accepted, loved, worthy, right? There's all of this deeper underlying emotional connection there, which started, back into our grandparents, our grandmothers, grandmothers, time period in which they kind of grew up with this. So you see that throughout history from early 1920s that these messages were kind of aimed towards white women. And it's just, it's fascinating, and it still kind of rattles me because I was born before this. But in 1985, it was actually the first time where researchers started started including people of color in health outcome research, in public health research. And this is crazy, okay? Because and I can speak to this, studying nutrition and dietetics, that you've heard of, and I'm going to talk more to this about the BMI scales. The BMI scales were actually developed as a population measure. They were never, ever, ever, ever intended to be something that an individual looked at as a source of their health status. Okay, so I want to really push that home. You may have heard this before, but BMI was never, ever intended to be a individualized measurement of your quote unquote weight health. Okay, it was actually to look at populations at large, and early on it was just done on white populations. What we know about people of different background and cultural origin is that bone density and muscle mass are different. So somebody who's of Caucasian descent is going to have a different, like, genetic bone mass density and muscle mass propensity than compared to someone who's of African American descent, as an example. An African American descent actually has a higher bone density and typically a higher lean mass proportion in their body, which makes them heavier on the scale. Okay, so on BMI standards, if this BMI stuff was created on white bodies, you're going to find that people of different cultural backgrounds, they're going to look like they fall into a higher weight category on the BMI scale. So it's really not fair, right, to look at BMI across all cultural. Hey, Diana. So it's really important to not look at BMI as a really effective tool for measuring individual variation, but also across different cultural backgrounds, right? So I hope that makes sense. Let me know if I need to clarify that at all. I want to try to keep this presentation somewhat brief so you guys can ask questions and get something out of this without listening to me for an hour and a half, right? So, but I think the take-home point is that when they started doing more research on these different populations within America, on people of color is what I'll use generally, but that includes all different cultures other than white Americans, right? They started to learn that there was this there's a early correlation with low income and people of color having higher incidence of heart disease and high blood pressure and all these other comorbidities. And they also saw that they had higher BMI. So they thought the solution, right, was just to tell this population to lose weight, and the weight loss is going to cure the ailments that are associated with a higher weight. Well, that's flawed because that's not truly looking at root cause. So it's not necessarily the weight that's the issue here. And this is getting into healthy body at every size research, where we're really coming up against all this messaging in our society. Oh, you just have to lose weight to fix this problem, when there's actually deeper roots, right? And in this context, the roots of these health issues in this lower income population, as well as in people of color, really had more to do with the root issue of poverty and socioeconomic status, right? Like that's where, even today, a lot of anti-diet dietitians and health advocates are really pushing for this idea that we need to actually look at root cause, and not just be like, people need to lose weight. No, it's actually way more complicated than that. And if you just look at one specific subpopulation, a single mom, single moms with lower incomes actually have the highest level of food insecurity, and they're working a couple jobs, and they don't have the time to chop vegetables at night, right? So they're getting a lot of grab and go meals that might be less nutrient dense, and they're just going to be more stressed in general. So you might not see them eating regular meals or feeding their children regular meals just because of the context of their life and the stress. So if we look at root cause, which I'm particularly interested in, and I hope you are too, it's so interesting to note that maybe it's not weight we should be talking about. It's actually the deeper underneath of what's going on in a person's life, like a more holistic approach, a more centered look on a person when we're talking about their health. So there's this also kind of a problematic thing that's kind of come along generationally with everything I've already talked about, is this inferiority logic, where if a person is not doing well, if a person is not doing well with their health, it's their own fault, right? Like it's your fault if you are at a BMI. Like, I'm going to get back to the BMI thing, by the way. But if your BMI is too high, or if you have high blood pressure, but we have to recognize that there are a lot of factors that impact health, to include the environment that we live in. I've studied a lot of environmental medicine, exposure to toxins, and, I'm not going to get into that, but there's environmental factors that influence our health. There's socioeconomic status that starts at birth that you don't really get to decide. You don't get to decide if you were formula or breastfed. You don't get to decide how you were born. You don't get to decide how you were taken care of as a young infant, right? That can impact your life into your adulthood. And then, of course, there's genetics. There's so many different things. There's food choices, of course, come into that. But, there's this idea that comes along with diet culture that of course, we have empowerment. We can be in charge of our health, but there are also other things that have influenced our health outcomes. I often think about autoimmune patients as well. They just feel really, I see a lot of, and I've worked with a lot of autoimmune patients, and they just feel like this, like, what did I do wrong mentality that breeds into their stress, which actually kind of becomes a vicious cycle in their health paradigm. Not to mention autoimmune influences brain health, and it's just a whole like mad mess, right? So it's important that we understand that, yes, we do have control of our health, but we also have other factors that have influenced our health that we didn't necessarily have full control of. So back to the BMI thing, and I think this is important to talk about, but there's just because BMI was developed as a population strategy, of course, and now we're using it as a individual way to identify people's health status by their weight, which isn't fair, but it's done in the medical system, right? And I worked at the hospital. I worked as a clinical dietitian for just like a year and a half. It wasn't very long. I didn't really love it, so I quit. But I got a lot of referrals for BMI over 40. Okay, so I got BMI over 40, or whatever number I got. Physician consults, like, this patient needs to lose weight, right? That was my job, to go in and talk to this patient about weight loss for 5 minutes. I mean, it was just asinine, and it was a billable code. The problem is it's like a billable code, like insurance will reimburse for it, right? So a doctor sees this on their chart, and they see a BMI of blah, 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 50 or whatever. They have a responsibility in some ways to talk about weight, even if the person came in for an ear infection or a bladder infection, has nothing to do with their BMI. They're still going to get talked about it. And what that creates for a person who might be struggling with their weight is a lot of shame and guilt that does not help the situation, right? But it's this kind of this medical system that uses BMI as a billable charge that it kind of pins a doctor down, right? Like, they feel the need to address it when there's not very much time, because the health of a person is so much bigger than their BMI, their weight status. Like, there's so much more that goes into it. But I saw it firsthand, like, especially in the acute setting, like in a hospital, there's not enough time to address BMI, or not even BMI, but address weight stuff. I mean, that's a lifetime right? That's a lifetime of factors that were controllable and uncontrollable. And that doesn't necessarily indicate a person's health status, right? Like I have seen incredibly healthy um, people at higher BMIs and really, really sick people at low BMI or lower, quote unquote, normal BMIs, right? Like it doesn't necessarily indicate the health of a person, their body size. But there's been, again, rooted in history and throughout diet culture. And again, it's become like the history, like the racial origins that I talked about have been erased, but but what's been perpetuated is this view on weight as what we need to fix our health problems in America and the healthcare issues. So I hope this is making sense. Please feel free to pop in some comments if this is resonating or interesting to you. But examining these biases in the medical field and the public health field, I feel, and if you listen to or read the book by Sabrina, again, just for those of you who have jumped on, the book I'm referencing with some of this information is Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia. It's a relatively new book. It came out this spring. You can find it on Amazon if you're interested in the history of diet culture, which I think is fascinating. And it really helps bring light to how we can fix it, right? So in addition to this, there's also, and this has been actually very challenging for me. So I'm just going to tell you guys right now, this was actually really challenging for me as a dietitian. But there's a lot of research that was done by a professor. His name was Brian Wansink. His research is cited in over 20,000 places across the internet and in books. And he's very popular for some of the portion distortion information flying out there around like how portion sizes at restaurants are the reason that our country is suffering from, they call it the obesity epidemic. Okay, why so many people have gained unwanted weight has to do with the food industry, and portion sizes have grown substantially. And while that's true, it's actually interesting to learn that a lot of his research has actually been debunked. Okay, and he dishonorably left Cornell University a few years ago as a result of this misinterpreted data, if you will. And it's, it has perpetuated the diet culture to think that, it's just because portion sizes have gotten bigger that the American population has gotten bigger. And, for a long time as a dietitian, I adhered to that as truth. Like I just looked at portion sizes and was like, yeah, that's the issue. That's the problem. People can't control themselves with food because it's so good. And it's laden with, fat, sugar, salt, and things like that make food taste better. And while this is all to a degree true that, we can eat more when it's, tastes a certain way or has certain chemicals or ingredients added, it's also true that if we aren't in a diet culture mentality, okay, of kind of like a, this last supper mentality, like, oh, tomorrow I'll start the diet, has anyone experienced that? Oh, tomorrow I'm going to start eating well. So tonight we're going to go out to Applebee's and I'm going to eat all the things, right? And the portions are going to be bigger. But what I believe is the root cause here, it's not the portion sizes, it's the disconnection from our hunger and our satiety cues, because we've been so deeply influenced by the diet culture to follow rules and count our calories and weigh our food to eat the quote unquote right amount, which is incredibly difficult to give general information about portion size to a huge population, since it's going to vary so much between individual to individual. So what's actually happened is diet culture has actually made it more difficult for us to connect to our bodies, become, and this is the theme of the group, mindful and intuitive eaters, so that we can self-regulate, right? That we can self-regulate with food. So if we go out to the restaurant, right, and we do end up overeating, we feel overfull, we're feeling stuffed, we trust ourselves that over the next couple days, we're going to naturally regulate our calorie intake to offset, maybe the extra calories we ate that night at the restaurant. Somebody who's not a mindful and intuitive eater, or still on this journey, we all are, right, may not trust themselves to self-regulate over time. Okay. The other thing that might happen to somebody who's not so influenced by diet culture is that they will eat their meal slowly with attunement to their body cues and actually stop when they're done and leave food on the plate without guilt. And that is totally challenging. And I raise my hand that that's still a challenge for me today at times. I think I posted about that this weekend where I left some pancakes on the plate. And that was not something I always could do. But two things were going on for me, right? I was deep set in diet culture. I was sure that I had to follow a specific plan. And when I overate, there was a lot of guilt and shame that came in. I didn't trust myself that that meal wouldn't make me gain 5 pounds. I didn't trust that the next couple days I would, quote unquote, self-regulate my intake to balance everything out. And I also was still in that clean the plate mentality where I felt like I needed to finish the food on my plate, just how I was raised. So it's just a mind fuck, if you will. So it's just amazing to think about this. Like, is it really portion sizes or is it diet culture that's just kind of snuck in there and taken over our thoughts, our emotions, our beliefs, which is what I talk about in my Peace with Food and Soul coaching program is reprogramming our relationship with food and body, get away from the diet culture and find attunement with our inner cues so that we can evade some of these messed up messages that have been generational, right? Diana has a great comment. I had a doctor tell me when I was in college, I was over my BMI, I needed to lose weight during a visit for a knee consult. I'm 5'8", size 6, and I have been since high school. And I was about 55 pounds and he told me that, but my BMI is 138 pounds. And last time I was close to that, I looked sick. This is a great example, Diana. It really upset me that most of it came from a heavily overweight male. Isn't that funny? I personally feel BMI should be thrown out the window. Yes. So that's a perfect example, Diana, of your unique body. Like, the scale does not dictate how healthy you are, like the number. And when we relate it back to BMI, which again, never intended to be for individuals, it really creates a messed up and distorted look at what we're supposed to be in terms of health. Okay. And then Sheila says, I spent years working towards a healthy BMI and almost looked sick when I achieved it. I mean, this is another great example. Like, so Sheila, thank you guys. Thanks for sharing. This is always, I love to get the feedback while I'm talking live here. Yeah, yeah. I'm going to say no more about that, but you guys kind of know where I'm going with this. So if you think that the food industry is the only one to blame for the issues in America, it's bigger than that, isn't it? Right? There's a lot that goes into this, and a lot of it is this disconnection that a lot of humans, and I'm not just speaking about women, that we have. Our intellectual mind takes over, the peer pressure from others takes over, and we've stopped listening to our body. Yeah, we've stopped listening to the cues of our heart brain and our enteric nervous system, which is called our gut brain. It's for another live, but they're very intuitive tools that we can use to reconnect our mind to our bodies that will completely change and our relationship with food. So, all right, so moving on. As you can tell, I'm really passionate about this topic, so I hope it's helping you understand some things. But knowing why diet culture exists, I believe, can be a source of awareness and ultimately a source of liberation for us from our own issues with food and body. So I'm hoping, again, that this information helps you, because when we can begin to question everything, including biased research, which there's a whole bunch of flaws with nutrition research, by the way. I did a whole live on that about a month and a half ago. You can go back in the units and look for that. But there's a lot of issues with nutrition research in general, a lot of correlation connections. There's also flashy headlines. There's one study that comes out, right? One study, and the news outlets take a hold of it and they blast it out. Red meat is bad for you. And there's no context, there's no deeper understanding of what that research really said. And the next month, red meat is good for you, right? Like, you know what I'm talking about. And again, this is feeding into diet culture. So again, that sneaky diet culture infiltrates itself through flashy headlines in media with very little context, right? And we're such a high consuming society now, with the advent of Facebook and Instagram, that we don't really spend time reading the research, nor are many of us trained to understand research studies. I mean, I'm in this field. I've gotten my master's degree and read tons of research, and I still feel overwhelmed when I pick up a research paper to try to decipher truth from non-truth, right? So imagine what it's like if you haven't studied that, to just read a headline. Like, of course, it's going to come across as truth, right? And so we need to start questioning everything and removing those noises, removing those voices, and start tuning into our own bodies, because that's where the truth truly lies. No one of you has or can have a diet that's the same as another person that's optimal. Everyone's a little bit different. There's so many factors that play into it, right? So, and just to add to this, this dieting culture is the number one predictor of weight gain is having had done a diet in the past. Okay, you've heard of yo-yo dieting. Many of you have experienced it. I've experienced it myself. The ups and downs of the scale go right along with the ups and the downs of the emotions, right? There's this roller coaster that we ride when we are in thick, heavy diet culture. Okay, and there's no shame in this. Again, this is a product of our society. It's a product of history, right? As I discussed at the front end of this talk, it's a product of a lot of things. And so I don't want anyone to feel bad, like you're like, oh, just got off keto or ready to start intermittent fasting or something. I'm not telling you that that's wrong or you're wrong, because it's not about that. Our diets aren't related to our morals or who we are in self-worth. Again, that's sometimes a difficult connection to make, but it's important to look at. So, so I'm going to kind of talk about now some other ways that diet culture has snuck into our lives. And, there's this kind of overarching theme in our society of fat phobia, this like fear of people who carry extra weight or live in larger bodies, which can lead to, and this is true of my profession, other nutritionists. I mean, it's something like we really have to look into, and I've had to really dig deep in myself as well. But it can lead to this well-intended encouragement of health and well-being, but secretly wanting people to look a certain way. And this came up, and I listened to this from another dietitian who had worked with a client who was dealing with her own health and body issues, right? And she had a partner who was a little bit overweight. So she was wanting him to look a different way. Okay, just plain and simple. She wanted him to look a different way, and she disguised it in messaging to him like, oh, I want you to be healthy. I want you to, try this diet. I, prepare these meals a certain way. And it's really interesting to start to look at that more deeply and recognize, like, do we want them to be healthy, or do we want their bodies to look different? And it's, it's not an easy thing to think about, right? Because all of us are very well intending. We love our families, our partners, our friends, and and maybe even our daughters or our sons. They might have a certain particular body shape that isn't what we think it should be. I mean, this is like really hot and heavy stuff that we have to like kind of mull over and spend time with in order to release. But this can come up for people where there's these well-intended motivation to support someone, but it's really centered around this fear of someone not fitting into like the ideal weight or size or shape or whatever. Okay. So it's always an interesting question and maybe a hard one to ask, but do you have underlying issues with people who live in larger bodies in general? It's not, it's not an easy question to answer. And most of you listening, and myself included, are going to say, no, of course not. And at the same time, we still struggle with our own body shape, right? And I had a conversation in a group coaching call yesterday. And one of the women in the call was saying, I look at other women who are of what live in larger bodies, and I think they're sexy and amazing and beautiful, but I'm the exception, and I don't look sexy and beautiful in a larger body, right? So there's this disconnect also with our own bodies and how we look at other women outside of us. We're always our own worst critic, always. So okay, I have notes in front of me. So I hope this is all resonating with you guys. Another way that sneaky diet culture can sneak in is through conversations with your girlfriends, right? And your mom or your sisters. And in so many circumstances, I have had women in my working with them individually or group programs where they're just doing so well, right? They're feeling connected to their body, they're feeling their hunger, they're starting to reject the diet mentality. And then they go to work or they go to a friend's happy hour, and all the women are talking about the diet they just went on, the weight they just lost, how many calories are on their plate. You know, so many women actually change how they're eating when they're with their friends or with other women. They might eat less, they might eat more. There's interesting research around that. But it's all about like that peer pressure piece, right? So you might think, oh, I'm doing good. I'm a mindful and intuitive eater now. And then you can easily get swept up in peer pressure, right? It might feel innocent to actually even kind of partake in that. You know, you might mention, oh, I'm doing this mindful and intuitive eating thing, and you know, start talking about your experience, and then someone will interject and be like, oh yeah, well, I did keto and I lost 50 pounds and I'm still, you know, and it just becomes this like, I don't know, this battle against wills, like my way is the good way. And really, again, the truth is that everyone's way is going to be different. And you being on a mindful and intuitive eating journey is actually the most sustainable. Like I will say that without hesitation. Because your mindful and intuitive eating journey might look like a more keto diet, maybe. I don't know. You might do better in higher protein, higher fat, or it might look more like plant based, or it might look more like Mediterranean, or it might look more like something else, right? So it's just important that we remove the labels, right? And didn't get into better attunement, start to reconnect with our hunger cues, our satiety cues, and actually even like our relationship with ourselves in the bedroom, which is not something women are always comfortable talking about, but it is something that comes into this whole diet culture piece, and this appreciation for our bodies as they are, is that some women's relationships with their partners is affected by their perception and view of their body, right? And that connection is more challenging when we're feeling that dissatisfaction in our body. So this is also about feeling more connection in our body with our partners, when there's intimacy, intimacy involved, as an example. So anyway, back to the friends. You know, they're a very important part of your life, but it's important to take some inventory of who you're spending time with and what kind of things those friends are hung up on. And if it's diet and it's doing diet, and that influences you and that makes you question if this mindful and intuitive eating journey is really the right thing, right? It's important to take some inventory around that. Like, am I spending time with the people that are really supporting this journey, knowing that it's the one that's going to be the longest lasting, and going to be the best for my mental and emotional health? Who is nourishing me? Who in my life is nourishing me? And can I have a conversation about it? Or do I just need to distance myself from those people? And that's hard. And that's a reason that a lot of people start the mindful and intuitive eating journey and fall away from it, is because of that very difficult to deal with relationships with people who are really stuck and set in dieting. And this is especially hard if it's like a family member, right? Who's used dieting as part of their backbone for a long time. To break free from that and distance yourself from that can be really, really hard. So I just want to just make note of that. You know, this is not easy, but it's possible, and the journey is worth it. And another thing that kind of a sneaky way diet culture comes into our life is just this general feeling, especially when someone starts the mindful and intuitive eating journey, this general feeling of dis-ease, or feeling unsafe without the diet plan or something tracking their food, right? I've worked with clients who are trying to embark on a mindful and intuitive eating journey, but they like sign up for Noom thinking, oh, it's like psychologically based, but it still has rules, right? There's red foods and green foods, from what I understand. I've never downloaded Noom, but it's still breeding diet culture. Like that program, yeah, there's a psychology piece to it for sure, which I think is cool, but it's still breeding like good, bad food. You have to weigh yourself every day. And it's just like the client I'd worked with in this particular circumstance, she wanted to be a mindful, intuitive eater, but she's like, I just feel safer, using a tracking tool, right? And that's just that pervasive sneakiness that diet culture can have on our progress. Okay, some other ways that sneaky diet culture shows up in our lives is, and this has been a shift probably over the past 10 years, and this is something I've had to look at because I've taken part in this, definitely. And it's these wellness diets that are not promoting weight loss per se, but are promoting overall health. Okay, so think of Whole30, the Paleolithic diet, keto, intermittent fasting. They're really there promoting, health, which is good. I mean, I can't say that these diets are not nutrient dense. They sure are. They have merit. And they also are very restrictive, and they feed into diet culture by making foods that aren't on the diet plan forbidden or restricted. That can, again, play into the psyche, the way that we relate to food and body, creating more shame and guilt if we do partake in the eating of something outside the diet plan. That will just perpetuate this diet culture and lead to that yo-yo, like, I did paleo for 3 months, I couldn't do it anymore, I just needed bread, and then the person like takes off in the other direction, right? Not to say that those can't be templates for trying to eat foods that are more nutrient dense, but if you look at, are they good for everyone? Not necessarily, right? We really have to look at an individual and decide, how those diets can be used safely and effectively, if they are to be used. And I say that because I've used like paleo as a kind of a therapeutic approach to autoimmune disease, right? But we have to do that very, very, very carefully with a skilled practitioner who understands the mental and emotional backbone of the patient. Not everyone is appropriate for elimination diets, or another thing. I've done elimination diets in my practice for years as a way to help people uncover foods that are causing problems with digestion and whatnot. And I'm going to talk about digestion in a little bit. And it's not always appropriate. If I have a client who I feel is really, really deeply saturated in diet culture, I will not suggest an elimination diet. Whereas somebody who's just trying to, like, they're sick and there's not an issue with food or body, then they might be a more appropriate candidate for something like an elimination diet. But I'm just sharing this because these can feel like quick fixes or ways to achieve whether it's weight loss or health, and however we define that, it can still be tricky because they still promote that sense of deprivation, which can end up blowing up in our face down the road. It's usually just not sustainable. And that's the biggest kind of issue I've had with keto is, these people are having these huge successes with keto, whatever that success is. And the research, definitely there's some research around epilepsy as a therapeutic approach to epilepsy. But for the general population, the sustainability of a keto diet is pretty crap, if you ask me. Like, very few, when you do these studies on animals or cells in a petri dish, you don't take into account the whole person who goes to birthday parties and eats, out at dinner and has these social events, or these, uses food for emotional support. It's like, that's not part of an animal study or a petri dish. Like, the controlled environment of what keto promotes is like evidence-based, is really not rooted in what real reality is for people. And my observation from working as a dietitian for almost 15 years is that those diets don't last, and they just cause more heartache and more pain because someone loses 50 pounds, but they don't want to do keto for the rest of their life. And then they gain the weight back and it makes them feel like crap, right? So anyway, I hope you're still with me. I'm going to be talking a long time, so hopefully you can listen to this in pieces. But now I want to get into this gut health piece and a little bit of research around this connection between gut health and eating disorders. And when I talk about eating disorders, this is where the research is. It's not necessarily like there can be actually, you don't want to draw too many conclusions, but how we define an eating disorder is actually like on a spectrum. It's done by a psychiatrist or somebody who's trained in diagnostics of eating disorders. But what I want to bring home is that disordered eating, which is less well defined, can play into the similar issues related to gut health. Okay. So this has come from a couple dietitians that I listen to and have learned from, but there's a lot of this eating disorder and gut disorder research. And they've actually learned, and I found this fascinating when I was like, what? But that gut-related hypnotherapy was just as effective as an elimination diet in helping relieve symptoms from functional gut issues. And functional gut issues include things like heartburn, constipation, IBS. Those are all pretty popular functional gut disorders. This does not include things like celiac disease or Crohn's, which are actually mechanical gut disorders. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Those are different. Those are mechanical, not functional. And I know that might feel like a weird line when you're listening to this, but just note that, those, like if you have a true wheat or like an allergy, it's mechanical. Your body it's not able to handle a food, right? This isn't about like somebody having IBS and using food to kind of figure out like how to manage their IBS, right? So they found, this is just crazy, that gut-related hypnotherapy, okay, just as effective as an elimination diet. Now, as a clinician who's used the elimination diet for a long time, I was like, what? Because elimination diets are hard, right? They are hard. If anybody done an elimination diet? I'm just curious. I have. It sucked because it eliminated a lot. I did it out of like kind of curiosity to see what my patients were going through, and it was hard. So, so just knowing that what this illustrates, what this really brings up for me is that our mind, right, our mental, emotional, our beliefs influences our gut and vice versa. This is huge to understand. Our mind, our beliefs, our thoughts influence the function of our gut, as does, and that's related to stress as well. They found in research that about 16% of people with functional gut disorders have an eating disorder. Okay, 16%. But that in eating disorders, those who are diagnosed with eating disorders, over 90% have a functional gut disorder. So I'm going to repeat that again because it took me a second to like think about this, but 16% of functional gut disorders also have an eating disorder. So people who have functional gut things going on, they might have an eating disorder at the rate of 16% per research. But if you have a functional gut disorder, or I'm sorry, if you have an eating disorder, you've already been diagnosed with an eating disorder. And this research was done on anorexia nervosa, but that 90% plus of the women in the research studies also had a functional gut disorder. And the question is the eating disorder come first, or does the functional gut disorder come first? That's still being sorted out in the literature. I'm sure there's a connection in both ways, but it just illustrates again that we have this brain-gut connection that's related to our mental health, to anxiety, and to depression. And, they're thinking that eating disorders precede the functional gut disorders in many cases, which means that mental emotional state is actually preceding what's going on in the gut. And that, again, I don't want to extrapolate the research because I don't want to say something that's not true because it's not been evidence-based yet, but there is this idea that if we have disordered eating issues, so if we have, even if it's more mild than like say because there's a spectrum, and I definitely consider myself having a history of disordered eating. I don't know if I would have been classified as an eating disorder. I may have been. I over-exercised, underate, I had classic symptoms of disordered eating, but I also had IBS, right? I also had pretty bad IBS. I chewed a lot of gum, which played into it, to avoid eating real food. I used compensatory activities like running to burn off all the calories I ate. And these things created stress in my body, stress in my mind, which, I firsthand felt the effect on my gut, right? When I released that diet culture, when I let go and rejected the diet mentality and I started listening and learning how to attune to my body, I haven't had IBS symptoms since. And I see that so often in my program and working one-on-one with individuals. They have this like functional gut disorder. They get right with food through this work. They start paying attention. They start slowing down, and their gut issues go away. So does it mean that if you have a functional gut issue that you have a disordered eating? No, I want to make sure that's very, very clear, like really, really clear. Okay. Because that's not always the case there. And I know this to be true because I've worked in the clinical space where someone I'm very sure does not have disordered eating patterns and they still have functional gut stuff going on. Okay. So I just want to make sure that I'm not, you're not extrapolating this into thinking like, oh, if I have a functional gut issue, then I'm also disordered eating. That's not what I'm saying. There is a connection, there's an association, but it's at that 16%, you know? But it's something to consider because it plays into this idea that we have to reprogram our relationship with food and body in order to evade this. We have to look deeper. And this is the work that I do in my Peace with Food and Soul group coaching is we dive deeper and we ask the hard questions because it helps us break free for the long term of this culture, which is really rooted in diets. Okay. And we know that diets increase weight, they increase anxiety, they increase depression. It's messed up, right? Okay. In addition, I should add this, I have this on my notes, so I'll share it with you. But those with an eating disorder actually have increased, it's the clinical name, but it's called visceral hypersensitivity, which is just a fancy word. Okay, you can go share this with all your friends. Visceral hypersensitivity is just a fancy word for increased feeling in the gut, like feeling more things. So feeling pain more easily, feeling like if you have a gas bubble going through, it might be more painful than someone who doesn't have this hypersensitive gut. And also it has increased functional changes in the gut. And also added on to that is the personality traits associated with someone who has an eating disorder. This is interesting to note that, this kind of precipitates, certain personality traits, this visceral hypersensitivity, these functional changes of the gut can welcome in this functional gut disorder. Let's just call IBS as an example. That can actually persist independent of the eating disorder, even when the person is in recovery. So even though someone's recovered from an eating disorder, they may have persistent issues with gut function. Though I have seen in private practice, though I don't work specifically with those who have eating disorders, I've worked with people who have had disordered eating, and I have seen incredible improvements in functional gut symptoms when the food relationship, the body relationship has genuinely improved. There's a whole other thing that I can talk about the microbiome, but because I've been talking so long already, I'm just not going to today. But it's just the main point is that the microbiome, these little bacteria that live inside of our digestive tract, actually have a lot more. We know now, and the research is really early, but we know now that they can actually help dictate how much energy that we take from food. So some people with a particular microbiome might have taken more energy from food, and people with another microbiome might take in less. Okay, and this is interesting research. And it also can, if we're not careful, feed into diet culture, can it? Because people are going to start selling probiotic blends to give you the quote unquote gut of a slim human so you lose weight, right? And this is scary because I think it's coming, but it's not nearly well enough researched or understood to be put out on the market. So I just want to warn you right now, if you're someone who's like looking for that quick fix, which is normal, it's human, and you see a pill come on the market, it's a probiotic that says, oh, this will help you get skinny, okay? Just beware. That's bullshit. I'm just going to say it. So we have so much more to learn about the little bugs that live in our gut and how they influence health. But it is important to note that does change how we take in energy into our body, because it shows us that, calories in, calories out isn't always accurate. So counting calories for one person may make no difference than another person, right? And in fact, in my situation, I counted calories and I way under ate, and I actually got more inflamed. I had more functional gut issues. The scale was going up, right? And it was not about the weight, it was about my relationship with my body and my food, right? It was about me rejecting the diet mentality and doing all the things that I now teach and educate women on. That's what set me free, right? So, anyway, more food for thought. So, I'm going to wrap this up. I want to try to keep this at an hour. And please, again, if you're watching the replay, shoot a little replay hello in the comments and let me know if you have any questions or if this resonated for you. Maybe this information is new, maybe it's not. But I really feel like what we should be fighting for moving forward, and hopefully you enjoy this group so you can learn more about how to reconnect with body, how to reconnect with food, because it ultimately will be the long-term solution, is to look at this work. Go out and get that book, Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Sabrina Strings. That's a great place to start if you just want to learn more about this historical background of racism or diet culture rooted in racism. It's just fascinating. It will just help open your eyes. Start looking at pictures of women and men living in larger bodies, and really start to investigate what are your feelings and emotions that come up. Begin to normalize and see that health at every size is truly possible, and that a lot of our medical system has been set up on this diet culture. So this like push to lose weight is maybe unfounded, right? It's not really about weight loss isn't going to treat the root cause issue of the chronic health issues that we have in this country. Heart disease, diabetes. I mean, yeah, there's an association with weight, but it's not the root cause. The root cause might be socioeconomic status. It might be stress. It might be diet culture having this huge influence, and the yo-yo, right? Like that's what needs to be addressed, not the size of the person. And then practicing mindful and intuitive eating. So just being in this group, I hope you've enjoyed some of the content I've provided. I'll continue to provide content for you to support this work and support what you want to learn. Of course, I always have great ideas of what I think is important, but really I want to know what you think is important here. And, moving back to our natural state, because I believe it is our natural state to know how to self-regulate with food, to know how to eat enough, when to stop, when to start. That all plays into becoming a mindful and intuitive eater, but it's not always easier. It's part of how we were born, but it's quickly trained out of us. We're quickly unprogrammed, if you will. And so it's really looking at that and seeing that, okay, all right, I was told some lies growing up, and I want to redefine a new truth for myself so that myself, my children, the next generation, my partner, we can start to do something different. We can start to move forward in a different way. We can embrace healthy habits, but not under the context of, oh, I need to have my body at a different size, if that makes sense. And educating, really been important for me is educating my daughter and the next generation on how to cultivate this intuitive wisdom that we're all born with from the beginning, and helping my daughter understand that diet culture is pervasive. It's going to come in, but it's not a long-term solution, right? Loving ourselves, respecting our bodies, listening and feeling into our body, reconnecting the intellect to the cells of the body, which have so much freaking wisdom, right? That is the long-term solution. So re-educating, our young people around this. And then of course, looking at, and everybody has a different viewpoint on this, or ability to support this, but looking at the root causes of our health issues in this country, not as, oh, everyone losing weight is going to fix the chronic health issues in this country, but, oh, maybe poverty and socioeconomic status play into this, how we run our education system. I mean, there's just so many very, very difficult conversations to have. But the truth is, there's deeper stuff going on, right? That doesn't have to do with, oh, just get a population or a person to lose weight and everything changes. Quite frankly, it doesn't. The root issue stays there, and that's why the weight comes back on, or the inflammation persists, or the high cholesterol doesn't go away, or whatever it is that we're trying to improve. Because getting in relationship, intimate relationship with ourselves, is that transformation piece. Okay. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you so much. She says, amazing, interesting, and powerful information, pure empowerment. Thank you. Yeah, no, I love this. I hope I tried to, there's so much more I could say. There's so much more I could say. But if you want to learn more about this, or you feel like, gosh, I am so ready to be done with the diet culture, I am ready to break free, I'm ready to get into attunement with my own body, I want to invite you very powerfully in this moment. Let's get on a strategy call. I have a free food freedom strategy call that I offer, where we can, up to an hour, we can talk on the phone. And actually, it's a phone call. and I talk to you. It's not some other random person, but we'll talk about what's going on for you. And if I think that I can help you, I'll offer you an invitation into working with me. And if I don't think I can help you, or I don't need, you don't need the help or whatever, then I won't, and it's fine. There's nothing lost. This strategy session is really to support you and help you discover if this work is right for you, right? It's not for everyone, and I know that, but I know that the right women who are ready for it are ready, and they know it in their heart and their soul, right? They feel the diet culture's grips on their heart and soul, and they also recognize that they're ready to move forward in a new and powerful way. So, all right, my friends, I'm going to end it here. I've hit an hour. I've just been chatting away, but I've loved this. And if you have any questions, or tell me what you want to learn more about, like, I want to hear from you and understand from you what kind of content will help you move forward in your mindful and intuitive eating journey. Okay. All right. I'm going to end it here. Bye-bye. If I can find the button. Where's the button? There it is. Okay, bye.